Welcome to MacroHive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. MacroHive helps educate investors and provide investment insights for all markets from crypto to equities to bonds. For our latest views, visit macrohive.com. So greetings and welcome, Liang. It's great to have you on the podcast show.
Thank you, Bilal, for the invitation. It's a great honor to be your guest.
Great. Now, as you know, I know you're a listener of the podcast. You know, I always ask something about the origin story of my guest. So let me ask you that. You know, what is your origin story? What did you study at university? Was it inevitable you'd end up in finance? And some of your key career milestones up until now?
Okay, thanks. I grew up in Shanghai, and after 1 year study of engineering, I went to Germany in 1993. Early 1990s were transitional period in China. 1990, China reopened the stock market, stock exchange in Shanghai. And 1994, China devalued the renminbi by more than 50%. So then China began a longer period of stable growth. So at that time, I was very interested in the macroeconomics, and especially in the financial economics. I studied business engineering at the University of Karlsruhe, and right at the beginning of my study, I got a student job as administrator for the Karlsruhe capital market database. So at that time, it was the biggest capital research database for the capital market. So at that time, it was also very popular, you know, to do the stock market anomaly analysis, etc., etc. So I have all access to the data. So I did many different kind of analysis, empirical analysis, and try to also find a trading strategy based on these stock market anomalies. And after my PhD study, I became a quant portfolio manager at Sal Oppenheim Bank, at that time the biggest private bank in Europe. And I was focused on the CTA currency trading. And from my mentor and friend, Achim Walder, I learned the first lessons about currency trading and about the currency market. And we were also very successful, especially in the global financial crisis years. But the year between 2011 and 2013 was very difficult. But I think in these 3 years, I learned the most from the behavior, from the psychology or the trading behavior of the investors. So learned a lot. And after the Sal Oppenheim was fully integrated in the asset management arm of Deutsche Bank, I became a currency strategist. So my focus shifted to the global macro research and more to the currency management, but with underlying. So it is more a currency management. For example, currency overlays or strategic currency management. And during the pandemic years, I decided to move back to China to spend more time with my parents and with my father-in-law. And since then, I'm studying intensively with the Chinese economy and building up my own database and do the modeling and try to understand the situation better and also help the investor with their investment decision.
Great, that's great to hear that story. And just out of interest, Liang, why did you pick Germany to move to in the West rather than say the UK or the United States?
Yeah, my father completed his PhD study in the early years of 1990. This is the reason behind it. He is still a big fan of Germany.
Okay, great. No, that's great to know. Great. So, you know, I know you've been in Shanghai over the recent period and you've been intensively sort of studying the Chinese economy. You know, this year has been an interesting year for China. We had the reopening story at the start of the year. Many thought that this will be a really strong growth year for China. It didn't really turn out to be like that. So how would you characterize 2023 for China?
I think, as you say, the China abolished the zero COVID strategy just 1 year ago. So lots has happened really on the ground. It's a very interesting story. But I want to emphasize one aspect of the economy here. It is the consumption, and the government and the business are really doing very, very, very hard to try to create opportunities for consumers to spend. Just an anecdote, 2 weeks ago, I visited the German Christmas market in Shanghai, and it is really nice, and it can really compete with any Christmas market in Germany, and really recommend my German friend to come to Shanghai and visit the Christmas market, and especially when the weather is bad in Germany. But now back to the Chinese consumers, I think what we are observing is really a downgrade of their consumption behavior, and of course mainly due to the income loss during the pandemic years. And but it's very interesting is that if I'm in the street, as the street is full, I would say the sentiment in the street is much better than in the market, because if the young people, if they instead of doing a foreign trip, they are spending more time in the city. For example, they are organizing city walks, or they are cycling in the city and go to also fancy restaurants. So, but the restaurant spending is only 5% of the Chinese economy. So if you look at the Chinese economy, I would characterize the Chinese economy in 2023 in three features. The first is that the reopening-driven recovery is extremely short. It's only just lasted only one quarter. In the first quarter, Chinese economy grew by 2.3% Q/Q. It was mainly driven the pent-up demand in the first two months due to the consumption behavior. Then we have the second quarter, the Q/Q growth rate is 0.5%. It was actually the lowest growth rate over the last 10 years, outside the pandemic years. And the Q3 number, 1.3%, we can still remember. It was a strong surprise to the market, positive surprise to the market. But if we look at the history, it still belongs to the fourth lowest growth rate over the last 10 years. So overall, if we also look at the production data and looking at the consumption data, all data are very, very weak, with the exception of the consumption, as I said, in first quarters. All other data, retail sales, fixed asset investment, but also industrial productions, all belong to the lowest number over the last 10 years. I think this is the first feature. The second feature, what I would say, is we are observing increasing divergence between output and demand. If I look at the monthly data, I think now it's much better to look at monthly data than year-over-year data. If I look at the monthly data, the accumulated growth of industrial productions from June to October now is 2%, the industrial productions. But if I look at the retail sales, the growth rate accumulated is only 1%. And if I look at fixed asset investment, it is only 0.2%. So we have really an increasing divergence between the production and between the consumption. I think this will inevitably lead to a build-up of stock, and also to a price cut, and finally also to a slowdown of industrial productions. And
what you were saying there is the economy's just producing too much for what the demand in the economy can handle. So as you say, you'll get a stock inventory build up.
Yeah,
it could lead to price cuts, disinflationary type dynamics.
Yeah. I think this is what also we are observing now. We have again a declining inflation, and if you look at the PMI's data, it's also declining now. From the production data, also declining now. And also, I think also leads to my last feature of the economies. If we look at export price, the year-over-year development of export price is minus 10%. It is actually the largest decline since the beginning of the global financial crisis. And also, I think this of declining of the export price has offset actually the growth of amount from export. Right.
Okay, understood. Yeah. So kind of the value of exports hasn't gone up as much just because prices have fallen. Export, the price competitiveness on the international market has gone down. Prices are falling, so China doesn't get as much value from exporting as it used to.
Absolutely, yeah. So I would characterize in these three features.
Yeah. Okay, no, that sounds great. And you know, I mean, the other thing that you didn't mention was the housing market, and that's something we've all been focusing on. You know, we had the clampdown on the property market a year or two ago. It seems like this year, lots of the restrictions on the property market were lifted, but at the same time, we did see some further defaults in the property sector. So, can you talk more about the property sector?
Yes, I think the correction now starting last year is actually the third correction of the housing market, also in a very long-lasting boom starting 20 years ago in China. But the correction this time and the last time from 2014 and 2015 is that their structural change happened. Over this 8 years time, the growth rate of population has declined from 0.6% in 2016 to below zero. This first. The second is if you look at the urbanization rate, it's gone up 8%. So this is just now, I think we have structural changes regarding the demand, real demand for the house. And second, what I want to say is that since the peak of the housing demand in June 2021, the purchase of housing and housing start has dropped by 45%. Over the last 12 months, the purchase of housing is 1 billion square meter, down from 1.8 billion square meter in 2021. The question, okay, you have mentioned that China has eased the financial burdens for the home buyers through easing of definition for the first home buyers and lowering down payment rate and lowering the mortgage rate. But if we look at the transaction data and pricing data, they are not stabilizing now. The question for me is now how deep and how long the correction will further go. I think this is a quite different question. But there are some estimations among the local experts. They say the long-term equilibrium demand in the housing market is around 1 billion square meter every year. So it is exactly the number what we have observed in the last 12 months. But I think for me it's highly unlikely that the price drop will exactly stopped at this long-term equilibrium level, right? I think the S&P has released their report. They expect another 5% drop of housing starts in next year, 2024, in comparison with 15% drop of housing start. So yeah, I think what I think this is, of course we don't know how long it will go, but I think what we do know is that we may see a further divergence between the cities, tier 1 cities, for example, like Shanghai and Peking, and some strong so-called tier 2 cities, and weaker and tier 3 and tier 4 weaker cities. Because in the tier 1, tier 2 cities, they are still attracting working populations, and tier 1 cities like in Shanghai, Peking still have restrictions regarding who are allowed to buy home in the city. But in the tier 3 and tier 4 cities, they are just losing working population. So I think we may see a clear divergence between these places. I think also the price or investment behavior will be strongly determined by the real demand. I think it's interesting, for example, if we listen to what our former Minister of Finance said, Lu Jianwei, he said, according to his analysis, in China, there are around 300 migrant workers. So they work in cities like Shanghai or Peking, but they are not allowed due to the hukou system. I will come back to explain what hukou system is, but they are not allowed to settle in the big cities. I think going forward, we can expect a further divergence between the tier 1 and the strong tier 2 cities and the weaker cities like tier 3 and tier 4 cities. I think the reason is that in the tier 1 cities, they still have restrictions who are allowed to buy home. And secondly, they are still enjoying increasing working populations. But on the other hand, in the tier 3 and tier 4 cities, they are losing working populations. I think what can also play a role is for reform of the hukou system. Hukou system is actually something that separate the welfare system between the rural population and the urban populations. So this system was created in 1950s. So the idea is that if you're living in the rural area, you get free land. So you can use that land, and it will be your pension, and it is your welfare system. But in the city, you don't have the land, so the government will support you with the pension system and with the healthcare system. But now, of course, the situation has completely changed. So many migrant workers moved to the cities. They worked for 10 years, 20 years, but they are still not allowed to have access to the social welfare system in the city, and they are still not allowed to buy a home. The former finance minister Liu Jianwei, he said, according to his data, there are around 300 migrant workers.
So 300 million migrant workers.
300 million.
Okay. Yeah.
300 million. So.
And from what you're describing, they all basically want to work in the big cities, in the tier 1 cities. Yeah. So all of them are constantly coming into the cities, and they settle and they work there, but they don't have the same rights as people who are from the city originally.
Yeah, they have also a bigger problem is why they cannot settle in the city is because they are children. They are also not allowed to access the school system.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they can only their children can only between year 6 to 15. They have for this 9 years they can go to the normal school, but as long as they are in the kindergarten, they don't have access to the kindergarten. And after 9 years school time, they also don't have access to the school system. So this is the main reason.
So what do the migrant workers do? Do they send the kids back to their rural towns, and their grandparents look after the kids or something?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is what's happening now. Also, according to Liu Jianwei, around 30% of the population they living separated from their families in China. Mainly also due to the hukou system, right? So there's lots of discussions. I think that we will talk more about the hukou system. I think reform the hukou system can, of course, generate a sizable demand of the housing. But I think this part of demand will be at least partly covered by the affordable housing, what China is promoting now. So I think we are really, for the housing market, we are really in a transition period. I think the role as housing as a driver for the economic growth or as an investment project, the investment objective is gone. Now the housing is more like demand and consumer goods, right? But in the meantime, I think the home buyers, the banks, and the building companies and suppliers have to digest trillions of debt from the developers.
Okay, so what you're saying is housing historically was a big investment engine for the Chinese economy and just growth in the economy. Now it's becoming much more of a consumer good, an end good, and it can't be relied upon to be the engine of growth there. It's also interesting that you talk about demographics as well. So it does seem like China's facing a kind of Japan situation from the 90s, where suddenly you hit the demographic wall, and you suddenly lose your working age population, and you have to contend with that. And it sounds like housing demand is one aspect of how demographics is affecting Chinese growth.
Yeah, that's true.
And on the stimulus side, then what I've sort of seen China do historically in the 2000s and after the global financial crisis was they would use the property cycle as one of the big levers to stimulate the economy. They just pump money into the property sector and the economy would grow. So how does stimulus work now? I mean, we constantly hear about different stimulus measures. Every week there's some announcement, and it's really hard to work out, is it going to work or not? So how do you look at stimulus that we've heard about over the last, say, 6 months this year?
Yeah, I think this is also a very interesting topic. I think I can still remember in August, there are lots of discussions in the market, so whether China will deliver a bazooka-like stimulus. But actually, China has started a very big infrastructure program starting last year. So at that time, in August, the investment, the big I would say the big stimulus program has just peaked at that time. So it's interesting to look at what has China invested in. China has, over the last 12 months, China has invested 22 trillion renminbi in infrastructure program. Of course, this is according to my own calculation. It is around 10% higher than last year at this time, and it's exactly 2 trillion more than last year. And this 2 trillion has exactly offset the loss in the housing sector investment. So China didn't do more, but just offset this loss from housing investment. It is also very interesting to look at in which direction China has invested. The most part has invested in the green energy transition sector, in the green energy transition sector. So in this sector, the increase in infrastructure spending in this area is 25%. So it also fits very well with the energy transition goal in China. And nowadays the big program is declined in the last couple of months, because it's already peaked in August. So to prevent a sudden drop of investment and to stabilize the growth, China has announced two additional investment program. The first is the 1 trillion investment to improve the resilience to the natural catastrophe. And the second is investment in the so-called 3 new housing projects, affordable housing and urban village renovation and dual usage facilities. And also interesting to look at the amount. In total, the estimated amount is 1.6 trillion renminbi. So it can offset, in my view, another 15% drop of the housing market investment.
So it sounds a lot like it's not so much stimulus per se, it's really a stabilizing force that the announcements are. They're basically just offsetting the decline in the housing market. Yeah. So initially, as you say, it was on green tech, you could say, and now they're basically using some additional stimulus to offset another decline in housing in things like urban village regeneration and natural catastrophe mitigation.
Yeah, maybe I can add on with some additional information why China is not doing more than in the past. I think there are 2 reasons. The first one is just this is also very often discussed in China. It's increasingly difficult to find any economically meaningful project to invest in. Apart from the green energy transition, I think this is a good point. The second is in the past, the local government were the main initiators for all the infrastructure spendings. But if you look at their financial situations over the last 3 years, their debt to GDP ratio of local government has increased by 10%. It is now 85%. And at the same time, their revenues has stagnated. So they are just not able to do the investment. So it's also interesting to look at how these 2 additional infrastructure program is financed. The first program, we know it is through issuance of 1 trillion special central government bond. And for the second project, the 3 new housing projects, there's still no information there. But the speculation is that the central bank or the private sector will finance this project. I think it's also interesting to look at what our central bank governor said, Pan Guosheng said. He said, okay, China is actually, we are dealing with different programs. On the one hand, we have to stabilize the growth. So actually, maybe we need a stimulus, we need a growth rate, but we need infrastructure spending. But on the other hand, the central bank has still the goal to stabilize the financial system, to clean up the debt from local government debt, local government. So they have the 2 different tasks, and it looks for me that the central banks is currently prioritizing stabilizing the financial market, the financial system. He also said I think 2 or 3 weeks ago in a BRS meeting, he said very clearly, in his words, he said, the infrastructure spending can stimulate the growth in the short term, but it can worsen the long-term problem, the structural problem in China. So I think infrastructure, if we see some infrastructure spending, it will be very targeted, and I don't expect a larger scale infrastructure spending going forward.
Okay, so limited infrastructure spending, so no sort of bazooka type stimulus that we saw in 2009. And at the same time, as you rightly point out, the PBOC, the central bank, is on the one hand has to stimulate growth, but on the other hand has to prevent financial instability, debt problems building up, and so they're constantly trying to manage both risks, and they're very sensitive to the financial risks. Now, one thing we have seen from international observers, whether it's the IMF or other commentators, is that China needs to restructure its economy and become a consumer-led economy. You always hear this all the time. I mean, do you think that's possible or not? It's quite an abstract thing at some level. How do you re-engineer an economy? But I mean, do you think that's something that the government wants as a goal? Is it possible?
Yeah, I think this is also a very good question. Now China has actually the weakness of consumer spending now is actually the overlapping of two kinds of weakness. The first is cyclical weakness of consumer spending, and the second is a structural weakness of the consumer spending. The cyclical weakness of consumer spending, I think the reason is very clear, is due to the income loss during the pandemic years. If I look at the current income level of the Chinese population, it is below around 10% below the projection using the growth rate pre-COVID, so 10% down. So the year-over-year growth rate of consumption in China is now 5%. Usually it's 8%, so it's 3% less growth than in the past. I think the reason is again due to the income loss. The second is of course a much deep rooted is the very low share of the private consumption in the GDP. In China, it's only 35%. In the US, it's 70%. Even if we compare with the average of other BRICS countries, it is in other countries around 20% more than in China. And China investment share in China GDP is 40%. It's much higher than other countries. So the reason why it is so low, I think, is twofold. The first is the income share of Chinese workers from GDP is low. It's 40%. It's around 15% lower than many other countries. This is the first reason. The second reason is that it's due to a weak social welfare system. So Chinese workers actually they pay more into the social welfare system than they get. So Chinese government is emphasizing more on investment. So lots of money is going into investment, and the share of the government share of the social welfare system is very, very low. So the combination with low income plus a weak social welfare system with a high income, with high housing prices. So I think it is a good explanation why the saving ratio in China is 35%. In comparison with 10%, only 10% in US, for example. To answer your question, so can China be a consumer-led economy? I think also depends on these factors which are holding up the consumption now, how they will evolve over time, right? I think for the cyclical weakness, of course, we can come to the solution that China need more growth and more fiscal spending. China has actually increased the fiscal spending on the social welfare system over the last 12 months. With 7% growth, it's much higher than average growth of fiscal spending, but it's still weaker. Also, in comparison with all our unhistorical growth rate. The second is, of course, how to deal with the structural weakness of the consumption. It is actually a consensus in China among the policymakers and among also academics that the function of the government has to change from initiator of investment and to become more a management of the social welfare system. But of course, I think this kind of reform will take time. It cannot happen very overnight. Another, I think we can also talk about the Foucault system. Also, according to Lou Jianwei, our former finance minister, he also said if we let the migrant worker to settle in the city, then they have access to the social welfare system. Of course, they will also spend more. And through the reform of reform of the hukou systems, the consumption of the migrant work will be increased by around 30%. I think what also have, for example, is also the affordable housings, right? If you just if you have access to cheap apartments, then they can spend in other places.
Okay, understood. Okay, so there's a number of things: social welfare, affordable housing, reform of the migrant workers. So all of these things could be things that China could do, but obviously it's hard for a government to kind of pivot completely towards this, and it will take time. But if we move more to the here and now, I mean, what's your view on the economy for next year, for 2024?
Okay, I think the Reuters has just published its survey among 7 economic advisors in China, asks them about their forecast for the growth target for 2024. According to Reuters survey, 5 from the 7 advisors said they think 5% will be the growth target. Only one for 4.5%, another for a growth rate above 5%. I think usually, if we look at history, usually China set a goal which is reachable, which is maybe also easily to reach. So I did a very, very simple the analysis about the trend growth since the second quarters. If I use the industrial production data and analyze the growth rate, it is currently 4.5% if I use the industrial production data. But if I use the demand side data, combine fixed asset investment and the retail sales, the growth, the current trend growth is 3%. So in my view, even 4.5% is maybe not so easy to reach. But if we have all the discussions, China's government had different goals, right? To stabilize the growth, to generate income, generate jobs. On the other hand, China has also the goal to stabilize the financial market and not to overstimulate. So I think maybe 4.5% is a golden average for the growth target next year.
Okay, understood. Okay, so so it's going to be a tough year again for China next year, compared to what consensus is certainly thinking. And in your view, looking at the demand side of the economy gives you a sort of a more true sense of how strong the economy is. So that's excellent. We've covered a lot of ground, so I do want to now move to some personal questions, which I'd like to ask all of my guests. First is, what's the best investment advice you've ever received from anyone?
Okay. I think that the best what I learned from my working with Ahimada is that we should be very cautious with the positive feedback loop. What I mean is that if you have some strategy that works well in the past, maybe in the last three months, then we always have a tendency to overweight this strategy. Or if we work in a team, someone has made a very good call in the last couple of weeks. Okay, we always to overweight his opinions. So what I learned is we have to be very, very cautious with this kind of positive feedback loop.
Okay, no, that's great. Great piece of advice. And that's just a general piece of advice for markets as well, when there's consensus trades or everyone's pessimistic, want to go the other way. How about this one? What advice would you give to people who are leaving university?
Okay, so I think for people who are just leave university, I think my advice is just to really pay attention. If someone tells you you are not good at something, I think then you know in which area you should really change yourself, and really make a difference. I think it can be maybe the best advice you can get. The second, what I say is maybe it's too early for the graduates, but maybe 15 later, if you work for 15 years, then you can think about this idea, how to prepare a life for 120 years.
That's so great.
I think this really it can really make not only change your investment, financial investment, but also because change of maturity, right? Something will completely, whether it's worthwhile to do something, for example, to learn a new language or to start something from scratch, can completely change. So this will be my advice to prepare
That's great.
for life.
Great. I think I'll take that advice on as well. It's not just university students. Okay, that's great. And so final question, what books have influenced you the most over your career?
Yeah, I think I would say maybe after I arrived in China, I think two books are maybe the most interesting books. The first book is The Eight Crises, lesson from China from 1949 to 2009. It tells the story about the eight financial crises in China. So what I learned from this book is that actually it's not first time we have a financial crisis. And the second what I learned is that the reform is usually has bring China out of the crisis. But also we can learn a lot from this book is in the past crisis, China has used the hukou system to prevent a hard landing in the cities. Now I think it's very interesting to look whether the abolishment of the hukou system can stimulate the growth and prevent the hard landing in the country.
Okay, that's great. So it's called Eight Crises, and is it available in English as well?
No, but it's no worries. This book is in Chinese, but I think nowadays it's quite easy. You can just using very simple apps to send that and to
translate it. Okay, great. Okay, no, I'll look out for that book.
Another book?
Yeah.
I have another book. It's also a very interesting book. It's about China's urban mega trends. This book is interesting because if we're talking about China, we also think there's Shanghai, Peking, and the rest. But in the realities, there are many hidden champions in China, and they are actually I think the driver for all the manufacturing in China, and they are also. I think they are also very they are also very favorable travel places in China now. So what I would also recommend my friends from Germany, if you come to Shanghai and visit the Crises market and after the plateaus, you can take a bullet train and visit this colorful and vivid city in China.
And that one's called the China Urban Megatrends.
Yeah.
And is that available in English or is it only in Chinese again?
I don't know, but I think listeners, if you have troubles to get these books, I can help you.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to look out for these books, and I'll get hold of my translation software to make sure I can understand the books as well. I mean, you've been excellent on the podcast. I've learned a lot. What's the best way for people to follow your work?
Yeah, I do LinkedIn. You can reach me through LinkedIn, or follow the research from MicroHive. I publish also my research workers through the MicroHive network.
Great. No, that's much appreciated. I valued a lot of your insights, having started to work with you over the course of this year. And I'll include links to everything that we've referred to, whether it's books or your work as well. So with that, thanks a lot, Liang. It's been fantastic speaking to you, and good luck for the rest of this year and for 2024 as well.
Thank you, Bilal.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please subscribe to the podcast show on Apple, Spotify, or if you listen to podcasts, leave a 5-star rating, a nice comment, and let other people know about the show. We'd be super grateful. Finally, sign up for our free newsletter at macrohive.com/free. That's macrohive.com/free. We'll be back soon, so tune in then.